everybody, welcome back to my channel. I'm sorry there hasn't been a video for the past few weeks. It's just been so crazy with ATAR coming out, HSC results, sorting out uni preferences, which I'll do a whole nother video on. But essentially today I'm here to show you how to memorize essays. Now when I was in year 12, it's weird to say was, when I was in year 12, this was one of the things that I got asked most by people. How do you remember so much information? So what I've done is I've tried to come up with different ways in which you can memorize essays for each of the learning types. So there's visual, auditory and kinesthetic. Some people are a combination of both. There's also audio digital is a type of learning style. I am a visual learner, but I do find it very useful to kind of dabble in the other learning styles as well. So I kind of use a mix, I would say. So I've come up with ways for each of them. I asked you guys to kind of send in what learning style you were. Most people said they were visual, which is great because that's what I am too. But I do have methods for all you other people too. I just wanted to say, essentially, there has kind of been, especially in Australia, this move with NESA to not want to rote learn or not to memorize essays. So I suppose what the question here is then, is why would you even be memorizing essays? For me personally, I think people forget that a lot of the time assessments, your HSC assessment isn't just the exam at the end, it's the stuff that goes along with it. And there are some tasks and assignments which you kind of know what the question's going to be and you can prepare a response very well and you can memorize it, but you can also remain quite adaptable. So for me, for example, there was an English task. We basically knew what the question was, but the stimulus would be different. So when you do memorize essays, make sure you're kind of keeping in mind that you do need to adapt, but I would much rather have them kind of memorized and have all this information and choose what I want to use rather than the potential to forget what I could put in there, if that makes sense. So I do think that there is value in memorizing essays. You can use them in the HSC as well, I think, which I did with a lot of success, especially in studies of religion. But keep in mind that there are stimuluses that most learning departments are starting to not like repeated responses, so make sure it is original if you are going to produce something which is memorized and that you do adapt it to whatever the question is. However, I do think memorizing is a really good place to start. So let's get into it. Okay, so the first style is visual learning. So visual learners generally, as explained, will learn by what they see, essentially, not potentially what they hear. Like I said, everyone kind of dabbles in a little bit of each, I think. All right, so here is an essay, which was for studies of religion. I actually repurposed this one essay, which I memorized at the beginning of year 12 at least 3 times, and I ended up using it in my HSC and did very well. So this one, this is probably going to be my example for this entire video, essentially. So what you want to do if you're a visual learner, which I think is quite helpful, is you're going to go through, essentially, and read paragraph at a time. So I'm not sure if you can see on the screen, I might put it like here. You're going to go through a paragraph at a time and essentially read the paragraph, look at it, maybe make some notes, so get a pen and be underlining and circling things which you find important or that are kind of big points within that paragraph. Read it, and then you're going to go onto a mind map. So a mind map was the closest kind of visual thing which I found. So you're going to go back and essentially put down all your points on a mind map that you remember from that particular paragraph. Then what you're going to do is, obviously when you do this for the first few times, you're going to miss out things. So what I like to do was in a different color, and I am a huge believer that color is good when you study. I know some people will say that it doesn't do anything. I find that it does. And you'd go back essentially and write the things that you missed in a particular color, and then you're going to highlight that, ideally in the same color, within your essay. And what you'll find is your mind is going to start jumping out with those particular points because they're more vivid, they're using color, and visually you can see that that's something that you missed and it becomes a point of like reference that you need to remember. You go down, you repeat that with all the paragraphs. I used to like to kind of in my head title my paragraphs. So for this would be like my intro. Then I used to call this the context paragraph. Then I would call this the commentary on the Mishnah because that's what what the content was about. And essentially you want to repeat that going down each paragraph, and eventually if you continue, it's not exactly, being a HSC student isn't the most environmentally friendly thing, but if you continue to print the essay and be highlighting what you're missing, you'll find that over time by doing those mind maps, what is getting highlighted is actually shrinking because you're remembering more and more based on that like visual connection, if that makes sense. And then once you've done it paragraph by paragraph, try and do the whole essay in a mind map, essentially. Once you've gotten to that point, you've pretty much memorized it. So that's what I would do if you're a visual learner. Now, my favorite form of memorizing essays, which is actually quite weird because it's for, I would say, more auditory learners, even though I'm a visual learner, is to memorize it like you're an actor. So this is, I think, the most really concrete way you're going to memorize your essay within your head. Obviously, that's where you're keeping it. So, again, I'm going to talk about this one, which was the essay which I can still to this day say off by heart. But essentially what you would do is you use, I think it's called the AB method or something like that, and you essentially read out a sentence, go back to the beginning, read it out again, and then you memorize that sentence. And then you move on to the next sentence. So you'll read the next 2 sentences together, say it again, read the whole thing again without looking at it. And then you do 3 sentences and then 4 sentences, etc, etc. And you essentially, if this is like the page, you'll go, yep, okay, got that. Yep, got that, go back. Yep, got that, go back. And it does take a long time. This whole thing for me would generally take me, I'd say, 2 hours to memorize the entire thing. So it is a long process, but once you've got it, it's very hard to forget. Once you've really memorized it. So I think that for me was the most effective way, was to memorize it like it was a monologue, essentially. I would combine it with the visual method as well, because obviously when you're in a exam room, you can't be saying your essay, so you want to make sure that when it comes to pen and paper, you actually do know what you're talking about. But yeah, that's essentially my most recommended way, would be to memorize the entire thing like it is a script and like you have to say it. If you're an auditory learner, this is excellent. You could also say the essay and record it with your voice, with like on your phone. And if you listen to it and try to like follow it along as if it's a song, that's another way in which you can memorize it too. And essentially you're preempting what words are going to be, and that shows that you've kind of committed it to memory. So the next thing is if you're a kinesthetic learner. So kinesthetic learners, I am not really a kinesthetic learner, but from my understanding, it's you learn by doing. So the way in which I would then say to do this if you're a kinesthetic learner is to just write it and write it and write it and keep writing it, making notes of and emphasizing points that you forget, but continue to write the essay over and over again, and by doing it, you're committing it to memory, essentially. If you are a kinesthetic learner, I would try to combine some of the other methods, like saying it like an actor or doing it in a mind map, because even though this is great to do it over and over again, there's no point kind of doing that unless you know the things that you are forgetting, or you're highlighting the things that you're forgetting, or you're placing more emphasis and maybe having a discussion about a particular point that you're forgetting. So for a kinesthetic learner, I'd say this is the most effective way, but do make sure that you combine it with some of the other methods as well. Yeah, and I've always said this too, but I think that when you teach something to another person, you remember it so well. So if you were finding that perhaps the visual thing wasn't working for you, and by you highlighting it, you're not remembering things still, maybe underline a point that you've missed on your like original essay and teach that point to another person. Have a conversation with someone about it, because if a kinesthetic learner learns by doing, perhaps by doing conversation, by having a conversation with someone, those points would become more emphasized for you. So yeah, they're essentially the 3 ways with which I will memorize essays. If you do have any questions, feel free to comment down below. But yeah, you can see like you'll end up printing, like this is for a different topic, but you can see that I have printed the same essay twice here, and what is highlighted has lessened a lot on that side, because I just continued to to go through that process. You do need to recognize as well that obviously when you are using your mind to memorize, your brain is a muscle and memory is a skill that needs to continually be practiced. So if you're maintaining a good study pattern and your mind is you're developing that process of recall, these shouldn't be entirely too difficult. So yeah, I hope you guys really enjoyed this video. If you have any questions, like I said, feel free to comment below. And I will see you for my next video.